set, Ms. Hayden.
Thank you, Your
All right,
Honor.
ladies and gentlemen, please now give your attention to Ms. Hayden, who represents Mr. Vernon.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, ladies and gentlemen. My name is M.J. Hayden, and I represent Lonnie Vernon. Now, I've been sitting here with all of y'all the past couple of hours, and what I hear is Schaeffer Cox, Schaeffer Cox, Schaeffer Cox. Maybe a little bit of Coleman Barney, but Schaeffer Cox. I've heard very little about Lonnie Vernon. We might all be saying, well, why is Lonnie Vernon here? Well, I would submit that Lonnie Vernon is here because he has very poor taste in the people that he associates with. And he's gotten caught up in this, and basically, he's bycatch. This case is about Schaeffer Cox and Coleman Barney. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about Lonnie. Lonnie's rough around the edges. Lonnie's a hard-working truck driver. And he tends to be a little bit of a loudmouth. He's a blowhard. He tends to exaggerate. And you're going to hear tapes of him. But when you look at the whole situation, I mean, obviously you can tell Mr. Vernon is quite older than these two other gentlemen. He didn't quite fit in with these younger folks. He wanted to. He wanted people to like him. He wanted people to pay attention to him. But obviously he just couldn't speak as eloquent as Mr. Cox. He's not a successful business person like Mr. Barney. And so in order to get attention, he runs his mouth. He says extreme things. He exaggerates. He embellishes. And you're going to hear this. Where I come from, and you might have another word for it, but we call it fishtails. We all know somebody. If you tell them something, they got to one-up you, basically. You know, if you come back from a fishing trip and you say, I caught a fish this big, well, if you were talking to Lonnie Vernon would say, well, I caught one this big. I caught it using a stick, a piece of string, and a kernel of corn. That's just the way he is. He has to press it to the limit, to the extreme, so that he could get the attention. Because he's not an eloquent speaker. He's not very well educated. He's not a professional businessman. He's not a professional speech maker. So when you look at what Lonnie Vernon is charged with here, he's charged with conspiracy. 2 conspiracies. One to possess silencers and destructive devices, and one to murder government officers, federal government officers and employees. Now, when we get into this case, and before you go out to deliberate, the judge is going to explain to you what conspiracy is and what conspiracy isn't. To put it roughly, conspiracy is an agreement between one or more individuals. It cannot be an agreement with the government or the government informant. It has to be an agreement with somebody outside of the government. Now here, there was no agreement between Lonnie Vernon and Mr. Cox or Mr. Barney to possess destructive devices or to possess silencers. There was no agreement between Lonnie Vernon, Mr. Cox, or Mr. Barney to murder anyone. You're going to hear a lot of tapes, a lot of recordings. There are meetings, they call them command staff meetings, of the peacemaker militias. Lonnie Vernon was not part of the command staff. You'll hear testimony that he was not part of the command staff. The most important meetings were Mr. Cox and Mr. Vernon, Mr. Barney, and others were making these plans. Lonnie Vernon wasn't even there. There are going to be very few recordings between Lonnie Vernon and these two men. And there's certainly not going to be any recordings of an agreement. Lonnie Vernon was just a warm body in Mr. Cox's organization. Somebody that Mr. Cox could call on when he needed somebody to show up and nobody else was available. But he was not part of the upper echelon. He was not part of the command staff. Now, you've heard a lot of stuff this morning, a lot of pieces of evidence, and I believe the government told you they have some, 7, 8, 900 exhibits that they're going to show you. And I believe we're all in agreement that we would ask you to keep an open mind when you're looking at these pieces of evidence. Trials are a little bit funny because if we could all just come in and tell our stories and then ask you to rule, that'd be one thing. But the rules of evidence require that little bitty pieces of evidence come in, and you may be sitting there going, that has no meaning. Why do they put that piece of evidence in? What's the relevance of that? How does that connect to this piece? But in the end, each little piece will come back. We all get a chance to talk to you again, and we'll kind of, hopefully, connect those little pieces for you. Some people say there's two sides to every story. Well, in trial, there could be 3 sides or 4 sides to every story. And we're all going to come back and tell you what we believe the evidence will show. And when I come back and speak with you again, I'm going to tell you why all these 6, 7, 8, 900 pieces of evidence do not convict Lonnie Vernon. Because there was no agreement. There was no conspiracy between Lonnie Vernon and these two men. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hayden. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we need to take a little time to get ready for presentation of evidence. I think I'll just give you a break. There's no need for you to sit here while we do this. It'll take 10 minutes or so. So take a break, and we'll get back to you and start the evidence in a few minutes.